and welcome to Beyond the News. I'm your host, MINA SOHAIL. A look at our top stories for tonight. OIC strongly condemns terrorist act by Indian forces. Supreme Court orders 20% reduction in private school fee. Deal reached in overtime to keep Paris Climate Accord alive. French government hopes for Yellow Vest protests to run out of steam. But first, a look at a top story for tonight. 7 civilians were killed and dozens were injured in Indian-occupied Kashmir's Pulwama village on Saturday, after Indian armed forces brutally opened fire on unarmed peaceful crowd. Indian forces say that they fired to kill to disperse an unruly mob, but they ended up killing 7 civilians, shattering 7 families and alienating countless others. One after another, each was rushed to Pulwama district hospitals where they were declared brought dead. According to doctors working at the hospital, all of these civilians had bullet wounds above their waist, meaning that the Indian forces had no intention to frighten the crowd by firing in the air, but to kill innocent civilians. The Indian-occupied Kashmir is now on a security lockdown against the will of the people who came out to protest these killings. The Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front and the Joint Resistance Leadership both strongly condemned the arrest of senior Kashmiri leadership who were protesting the killings of the Kashmiri youth. In Srinagar, Indian police and paramilitary soldiers in riot gear and carrying automatic rifles laid steel barricades and coiled razor wire on roads and intersections to cut off neighborhoods in a bid to stop these protests. The ruthless Indian authorities stopped train services and suspended internet on mobile phones in the region. Now, this is a common tactic to make organizing protests more difficult and stop dissemination of protest videos by the Kashmiris. Prime Minister Imran Khan and Foreign Minister Qureshi both condemned the killings and called on the international community to intervene and stop bloodshed. Today, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation also issued a statement unanimously by condemning the killing of innocent Kashmiris. The OIC Secretariat termed this as a terrorist act and further called on the UN Security Council to play its role in ending this conflict according to relevant international resolutions. Now, to talk more about this serious issue, we are joined by Ms. Mashal Hussain Malik, Chairperson of Peace and Culture Organization. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Hussain, nearly 10 Kashmiri civilians have been killed by Indian forces, which they term as a military operation. The tragic death toll keeps on increasing and India gets away with it every time. What are your thoughts on this?
Because, it's a battlefield right now. And it's been going on since decades. It's a battle between unarmed, defenseless Kashmiris and the old military doctrine of India that, through military might, through terror, through raping the people, using rape as a weapon of war, pellets, phosphorus shells, you name it, and they're doing all that, maiming, blinding, crippling young generation, because what unnerves India the most is the indigenous narrative of right to self-determination of the Kashmiri people, because Kashmiris are literally, we are challenging them at every front. Even today, this was a landmark protest in living history. Imagine an entire nation coming out in a coffin-clad, wearing coffins, and with a motto that kill us all today, finally, and they're leading and they were marching towards Badami Bagh, the headquarters of the Indian Army, and challenging the Indian Army that their thirst for the Kashmiri blood is so high, then just once and for all, just kill all of us. I mean, right. Every day we're receiving dead bodies. Just imagine the pain we are going through as a nation. We don't even have a right to live nor to die. I mean, freedom comes much later. Some basic human dignity is also not protected over there. And everybody who was out there on the roads came out with the sentiment that, no matter what, we don't want to live anymore under this brutal occupation. So it's my message to the world even today, because it's an alarming situation that the height of oppression they're facing to the occupation force of India.
Now, Mr. Sen, India always seems to treat peaceful protesters as unruly crowd to justify their strong use of force. Can the spirit of peaceful Kashmiris really be broken by such brutalities, and will Kashmiris still march on for their rights?
They will. We don't have any option, do we? We don't want to live a life of slavery. We are not Indians. We were never a part of India. We want to be given the right to plebiscite, to exercise our right to freedom. which is the right of every human being under the Universal Human Rights Charter. If you go by that, every human being has a right to honor, dignity, and freedom. And that's what we are asking for. But if we are aliens to the world, we don't exist on this planet, then yes, definitely the world can keep a criminal silence and quite conveniently just issue statements, and that's it. So we demand today, as always, that, when will the world wake up and exert and put pressure on India to shun all this violence? First of all, we demand demilitarization and the shunning of the black laws, because these black laws give immunity to the Indian forces to do whatever they want to do with our people and not be persecuted, punished. In fact, they get applauded, they get promoted for that, they get rewards and medals. So is this their policy of Gandhi's India? I mean, if they call it a part of their nation, then is this the way they treat protesters within India? No, they don't. They don't kill them like this when they come out on the roads. So it's a message to that Indian constitution also. It's a violation of that. It's a violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions that were passed in our favor to give us that right. So it's a violation of every form of human or religious or freedom-loving people around the world. We are being targeted because we are Muslims also, majority. But our struggle is not religious-based. It's based on the sentiment of freedom. But from the Indian mindset, it's coming, they're attacking that. They're attacking the people over there, innocent people. Children are being, even a baby girl was blinded the other day. And this is the biggest mass blinding in living history on people, on a nation, which has never taken place before.
Now, Ms. Hussain, what has been the narrative of leaders like Mehbooba Mufti and Umar Abdullah, who are often complicit in downplaying the role of Indian state in such tragedies?
They're puppets, I mean, they come, sometimes BJP is in power, sometimes Umar Abdullah or Farooq Abdullah, or before that it was Mehbooba Mufti's father, it was Mufti Saeed used to rule, and now some alliance with the BJP, and now governor rules. So whosoever is ruling over there is basically a puppet of the Delhi Sarkar, and they follow their lines. And even after, when the elections take place, the assemblies that are formed, what legislations do they pass over there? Because these are legislative bodies, basically because they want to sell the sentiments of the public to grab their attention of the public, because it's a popular, it's a thinking amongst the masses. Every person on the road, every person is demanding freedom. So then they start using that language. But the moment they get into power, you know what they do.
Right.
In 2010, it was Umar Abdullah was in power. I was over there when the insurgents, when there was a lot of wave of violence, hundreds of people got killed. In the summers of 2010, there was economic blockade. Pellets were used in some incidents. So when he was not in power and when Mehbooba Mufti was in power, he was saying that, look what she's doing. She's using violence. What's the army doing? So it's their double standard. So one should not believe what they say, because actions speak louder than words.
Right. Then, Ms. Hussain, are you hopeful that this matter will now further be raised by the UN Security Council as well? Can we expect any strong international action against India?
I don't know. I mean, what's stopping the United Nations? Because even the reports, the Human Rights Commissioner has launched a very strong report, which is in depth. It has mentioned all the gross human rights violations that are going on over there, and demanded a commission. India has rejected it. We have a report from the British Parliament also. Now the European Parliament is also starting its official hearings in February, and they'll be collecting evidences. The world is going forward from issuing statements. They have now started reports, but now the next big step must be to stop the genocide. What kind of pressure to be put on Indian army to hold their hands that are trying to kill with the Indian army? They should snatch the weapons. They should ask for demilitarization, put pressure on India, and to shun all these black laws. So that's where we need the pressure. We need sanctions on India, defense sanctions, economic sanctions, because this is a humanitarian tragedy. An entire nation is being killed, being butchered daily. And today's call was so heart-wrenching. Seeing those photographs, every person is wearing coffins. They're coffin-clad people walking and marching on the roads. And is this what the world wants, that an entire nation should once and for all die and be wiped out?
Right, right. Sohail Malik Hussain, thank you so much for being on our show and talking to us. On that note, we take a quick break. Welcome back to the program. Now, diplomats from nearly 200 countries reached a deal in overtime in Katowice, Poland, where the 24th UN Climate Conference was held to help the Paris Climate Agreement alive by adopting a detailed set of rules to implement the pact. After an all-night negotiating session, the representatives of various countries called for the world to follow a uniform set of standards for measuring their planet warming emissions and tracking their climate policies. The 133-page deal also calls on countries to step up their plans to cut emissions ahead of another round of talks in 2020. For the first time, the COP members have called on the richer participants to be clearer about the aid that they intend to offer to help poorer nations install more clean energy or build resilience against natural disasters. At the end, the chairman of the COP24 talks said that putting the Paris Agreement to work is a big responsibility and we want to assure that no one gets left behind. The deal also provides some flexibility in terms of rules for the poorer countries so that they are not overwhelmed with regulations that have been put in place. While the summit might be hailed as a success on some fronts, it failed on different occasions, mostly by not pushing for enough. The world is currently off track in meeting goals set at the historic Paris Climate Accords, and the effects of climate mitigation are rarely seen in concrete numbers. The Katowice rule book also doesn't say who will pay for the cost of implementation and how such rules will scale on a worldwide basis. Now, critics point out that countries are now on their own to mitigate, to adapt, and to pay the cost of climate impact. Recently, the Foreign Office announced that Pakistan has been elected as the Vice President of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Advisor to Prime Minister Malik Aslam, who led Pakistan's delegation, said that Pakistan's election to the second highest position at the UN Climate Convention is a strong reaffirmation and vote of confidence in Pakistan's substantial contribution towards global effort of tackling climate change. Now, our guest, Ms. Raina Said Khan, joins us on the show. She is an environmental expert who was also a part of the recent summit in Poland. Thank you for joining us, Raina. Now, what exactly is Pakistan's role in this UN Convention on Climate Change? Are we really contributing as much as they seem to say?
Well, I think this year we sent a small delegation that was headed by Malik Aslam, the advisor to the PM on climate change, who has the status of a federal minister. So he led the delegation and he was there for the 2 weeks. And I think he really, because he's also served as vice president of the IUCN. So he's very familiar with the climate negotiations and with environmental issues in general. So I think he played an effective role. He attended many side events, really pushed Pakistan's vulnerability, highlighted Pakistan's vulnerability, and drew attention to what the government, the new government has been doing on the ground, which is of course the billion tree tsunami, which now they've announced will become the 10 billion tree tsunami. And also he highlighted other projects like the Indus Recharge project that they're going to be doing called Recharge Pakistan, and they've applied for funding from the Green Climate Fund in which they want to store the floodwaters of the Indus. Then he talked about climate resilient agriculture, how they're trying to, going to sort of bring farmers into the loop and inform them of, when to water their crops, how much water to use. And so Pakistan is, and also the most important thing for the world at least, he said that we're going to be moving away from coal, which was the previous government really had a strong stance on coal, and we're going to try and start investing in renewables like wind, solar, and of course hydro, because Pakistan has a huge hydro potential which hasn't been really utilized. So he offered all this to the plenary because he gave a country statement, and so he detailed all these things in his speech. and the speech was reported here, and of course it was welcomed there. So I think because of all these efforts and Pakistan's renewed commitment, and in the past Pakistan played a very positive role at these negotiations. In fact, it was our ambassador Jamshed Markar who in 1992 put the word framework. So you see, it's called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the word framework is because of a Pakistani negotiator, our top diplomat Jamshed Markar, who just recently passed away. So Pakistan's always been an important player, but unfortunately, in recent years we've lost, I guess our expertise hasn't been all that great, and then the previous government, the minister was not all that up to mark with his knowledge of climate issues. So it's lucky we've got a good minister now who could represent Pakistan's case, and because of that, I think his efforts and his really behind the scenes work, Pakistan got elected. So it's not going to be the minister, it's going to be Irfan Tariq, who's the DG at the Ministry of Climate Change. He will hold that position as vice president of the COP, and I think there are two countries who will hold this position. Pakistan is one of them.
Right. Now, Raina, since you were present in Poland, in your opinion, did the summit really succeed in its goals, or did it not push for more, as critics have been pointing out?
Well, I think from the climate activist point of view and from the NGOs point of view, I think it was not a success at all. I think they really watered it down. At the opening ceremony, I was there, and you had Sir David Attenborough, you had Arnold Schwarzenegger, and all these celebrities and world leaders really saying we have to do more. And then the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just published 1.5 degrees, a special report on 1.5 degrees, saying that the world really has to do much more, and we only have 12 years to do it. So there was all this push, hey, we have to do more, we have to ramp up our ambition, every country has to promise more, especially rich countries who cause climate change. We didn't cause climate change. Pakistan's emissions are rank 135th, so we have negligible emissions, but we're suffering. We're the 8th most vulnerable country according to the German Watch report that came out during the conference, and this is in terms of the countries who suffer the most from climate related disasters, and Pakistan ranks number 8 in the long term index. So we didn't cause it, but we're suffering, and as are many other developing countries, and we wanted to see more action, we wanted to see more finance coming in. In the end, no finance, the climate finance component, and money is always at the heart of these negotiations, and of course it was not forthcoming. So I think a lot of developing countries are disappointed. The process will continue. There'll be another conference next year, probably in Chile, they're saying in December. But there was not the kind of action that the world wanted to see, which the IPCC says has to be taken immediately, and the world is running out of time. That was one thing we kept hearing. All the experts say, the scientists tell us that the world is running, please do something, ramp up your action. Because even if you take all the promises that have been given by all the countries, including the developed world, the developing countries, it's not enough to meet the target of reducing it to 1.5.
Now,
so and the report was very clear that anything above 1.5, if it goes up to beyond 2 degrees, and it's chaos and catastrophe for our civilization. The planet will survive. It's just that our way of life will be completely endangered.
Will nations who utilize more than their carbon budget allows them to be held accountable now, the industrialized nations?
No, not really. It's a watered down rule book. It's just basically, people are now getting frustrated and saying that these conferences, annual conferences, are like a annual talk shop. Countries get together, they talk, and then they delay action. So it's all about kicking it down the road and saying, okay, next COP we'll bring it up again, and next COP we'll get more stringent rules, more stricter rules. Next COP we'll come up with more money, and so people are getting increasingly frustrated. And there was some protests at the conference, but Poland itself has a right-wing government, so a lot of these activists were arrested. They were sent out of the country. So they're hoping Chile next year is, it's a developing country, and the government is not as authoritarian as the Polish government. So maybe more people will come out on the roads, and the climate movement will pick up, and people will demand, will put more pressure on the rich countries to do more. So it's actually, what happened at the COP was that Russia, the United States of America, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia actually said that we do not welcome the IPCC report. They refused to recognize the word welcome. They wanted to just use the word note. So, if you're not even recognizing what the scientists are telling you, then how is the world going to move forward?
Right. Now, Raina, Pakistan has committed to submitting advised nationally determined contributions report in the year 2020. Considering that Pakistan has been an advocate of achieving a balance between coal and other forms of energy, do you see any major changes to the NDC?
Yes, actually, because you see the previous NDC did not factor the billion tree tsunami into it, and of course, which is now going to be turned into the 10 billion tree tsunami, because they're going to be planting trees and restoring forests across the country. That is the goal of the new government. PTI's new government has promised that. So that has not been factored into the NDC. And of course, this Recharge Pakistan program, and then all the actions they're going to take with agriculture. And then there's a new project in Karachi called the Karachi Breeze, or the Karachi Rapid BRT bus rapid system, that's going to be running on cattle gas and biogas basically. And that is upcoming. It hasn't, its implementation is starting soon. So all these projects will actually decrease our emissions. So what this government has said at COP24 in Poland is that we are now going to be looking at the numbers, we're going to be calculating our emissions, and we're going to revise, possibly revise our targets. We promised 20% cuts by 2030, subject to $40 billion US dollars coming in. But as we know at this COP, that money is not really going to materialize, not in those numbers. And so really it's, you know, what's left after Katowice is that more or less developing countries are left to their own now to take action. And, you know, as Malika MINA minister said, that, you know, regardless of what happens at the COP, Pakistan has to do what it can on the ground to protect its own people. So they will continue with these projects and get money from, you know, other sources. I think, you know, the Green Climate Fund is one source, and there's the ADB, the other donors, and then the Billion Tree, they've used their own, it's self-financed.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show and talking to us, Raina. We'll take a quick break here, but stay tuned as more to come up ahead. Welcome back to the program. Now, the Yellow Vest protesters came out in the streets of major cities in France for the 5th consecutive weekend to protest against inequality and stand up for their rights. But some sources indicate that the protests are quickly dissipating, with less than usual number of people participating. Around 66,000 people turned up on Saturday, a huge drop compared to the previous weekend, when nearly 125,000 people showed up in full force. Riot police with their armoured trucks did their best to contain protesters, and according to the French government, 168 arrests were made in Paris alone. President Emmanuel Macron gave a televised speech that had as many viewers as his country's World Cup football victory did during the summer. Now, the number being somewhere between around 23 million. The 13-minute speech is touted to be the turning point of the protests, since President Macron announced some changes on several key policies that have been a source of contention. He indicated that there would be essentially an increase of €100 for minimum monthly wage earners starting next year, tax-free overtime and Christmas bonus pay for some workers. He has also publicly backed a plan of higher social changes on smaller pensions. But for many protesters, the grievances that shape up their experiences still remain, and many feel alienated because of it. There are also reports that France's far-right National Rally Party, led by its known leader Marine Le Pen, has now been presented with a new opportunity. In hopes to capitalize from the Yellow Vest protests, the National Rally Party have begun providing demonstrators with venues as well as moral encouragement. The party also hopes to send their activists to the ground to push for an anti-immigrant agenda, which never really was the focus of the Yellow Vest movement to begin with. There is nothing centralized about these protests, nor is there a hierarchical leadership, but growing discontent suggests that the French government has overlooked key insights into how the Republic's citizens are doing. Perhaps now that French president's ratings have begun taking a sharp fall, he will try amending his past mistakes. We have with us now Sara Farid, the freelance photographer based in Paris, whose work has appeared in Reuters and the New York Times, among many more publications. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Thanks, Mina.
So, Sara, let's discuss the protests first. You have gone on the streets and covered some of these in Paris. Can you describe the mood for us among those who are part of these?
Well, Mina, in the streets of Paris, what you see is a big social movement. People have come out. Yes, there have been violence and cars have been burned, but the main sentiment of people on the street is they're demanding social justice and their rights. And the slogans that you hear is that they are shouting that Macron, give us our liberty back. And they have demanded Macron to resign even. But the major essence of the protest is that the people feel they have not been heard by the government. They're not included in the policies, and it's not a government for common people. And they are on the streets to demand their rights. So yeah, you see that, and people, even if many people in the yellow vest protest movement, they don't agree with the violence. And they're more into like we need to demand our rights from this current government.
Right. Now, Sarah, is the Yellow Vest movement disintegrating as predicted?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at the numbers of this, what we call Gilets Jaunes Act 5, which was this Saturday, which increased almost like half the amount of people came out. But I think it doesn't mean that it is being disintegrated, but it's an unstructured and leaderless movement, and it's been peddled mostly by the social media. But it is also being discussed right now that it is kind of you can say a fractured movement, and it has lost its steam because of the sharp decrease. But there's need to look at it from this perspective also, that they have been successful in bringing Paris in general and France, also, like the whole country, but in particular Paris, into a lockdown. The monuments, shops, museums, public transport was shut down for 5 consecutive Saturdays.
Right.
The most touristy parts of the city were turned into a fighting ground with burning cars and tear gas. More than 8,000 police was deployed. So, and they have made the government to take a U-turn. So it's actually made progress with what they demanded, and we need to consider that it's Christmas and holiday season around the corner, and the temperatures are dropping. It's getting really cold here, but we yet to see that after the holiday ends, and these are working class people who also have families to attend and jobs to do.
Right.
But I personally don't think this is movement has ended. There's no clear way of saying that.
Right. Now, Sarah, so what has been the public's reaction towards President Macron's speech that was televised recently? Do you feel he has been successful in appeasing these protesters?
Well, so far this has been the biggest crisis faced by Macron's government. When the president came on TV to address the nation, he made that rare admission of shortcomings because he's regarded as a very arrogant president. And he took ownership to the problems. He had a very mellow tone, his body language. He admitted his mistakes and legitimized the complaints of angry French people protesting on the roads. And he even apologized for letting them down. And people somehow needed that from him. And there is no doubt that after his address last Monday, the next protest saw very few people on the streets. And even though the economic concessions that he has offered were immediately called out as too little too late, or people on the streets said they are like crumbs being thrown at him, at the French public. But there are reforms on the way. And just today, in a published interview by the French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, he further elaborated on the key measures that the French government is considering. And like you said earlier in your program, that the tax cuts and the increase in the pay, these reforms are being considered. So people in general are very carefully, I would say, watching the government now, because after these protests, they feel that they still have the power to be heard when they come out of this.
Right. Now, Sarah, so you have covered protests in Pakistan as well. I'm curious to know that when it comes to, let's say, a rebellion against the government similar to this one, especially when it comes to increasing prices of basic commodities where the common man is affected, how different are things in the two countries?
I mean, for me, the major difference I draw from the fact that the the people who were on the roads, I mean, they were singing their national anthem, they were chanting march on, and you could hear the protesters shouting, like, demanding their liberty and their rights. And they had, even though they are not being very regular, like the whole movement, but they had very clear demands, and I mean they know what they're asking for, and these.
So you feel every person out there really had a focus and was there for a purpose?
I mean, they knew what they want at the end of the day. Their demands have been going here and there, but if you look at it, essentially all they want is to feel included, and they feel that the government is not for the people right now, for the common people. And they want, even like at one of the protesters, they brought these huge Q-tips, and they said, because the president doesn't listen to us, we've brought these for him. So, people, they want the government to look at them as people who have the power to get heard.
Right. Now, Sarah, we have some of your photographs from these protests as well. Can you describe some of them for us? We have one with the policeman on the street. Tell us about some of these.
Yeah, well, for Paris and people of Paris, this was a bit too violent. I mean, even though coming from a country like Pakistan, where you see many protests with tear gas.
Violence is the norm, yes.
And here, the general reaction of people were like it was a city of in a shutdown. People left town, or they were like, you could see in big apartment buildings, like people were watching from the balcony, as if there was this fear and feeling of terror.
Right.
But there were huge numbers of police. You could see armored cars, which is very rare in a city like Paris. There was police, huge numbers of police deployed on the streets. They were tear gassing, but people were not deterred by it. They were controlled, but they still kept going on. And yeah, I mean, the police had their tactics to do crowd management, and there were big water cannons deployed on the roads. But one of the major mission of all this was to stop destruction, and that's what Macron also said, that he will not tolerate any destruction done to the cities.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Sarah, and talking to us. We're going to take a quick break here and be back. Welcome back to the program. Now, hearing a suo motu case pertaining to the excessive fee charged by private schools, the three-member Supreme Court bench ordered a 20% decrease in the fee being charged by all private schools countrywide. The top court also ordered the private schools to return half of the fee charged during the recent summer vacations as well. Now, this order is applicable to all those private schools that were charging more than 5,000 rupees a month as fee. Counsel for the plaintiff told the court that no school had its fee approved by any regulatory authority. The court also summoned FBR Chairman and FIA Director General to appear on the next date of hearing. Now, speaking about government regulations, Punjab Chief Minister for School Education, Dr. Murad Ras, has said that the government is actively trying to approve of such a regulatory authority to keep checks and balances on private schools. A bill has already been drafted that will be approved by the Ministry of Law very soon before the final approval from Cabinet. The Federal Investigation Agency has also begun seizing records of more private school chains in various districts. The FIS said that it would submit a primary report to the Supreme Court in 15 days. Here's now to talk more about the case and the interim order. We're joined by a guest, Mr. Rizwan Ali, who is the Vice President of All Sindh Parents Association, here with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Rizwan Ali, what is your view on the Supreme Court's decrease of 20% fee in private schools?
To be honest, we haven't received a certified copy as yet, so we'll not be able to comment as much. But the order released by Sindh High Court back on 3rd September, it said that base fee should be set as per last approved fee structure of the private institutions. I'm specifically talking about the Sindh province. But if we see that the major big schools, big chains, I don't want to call their names, but they haven't had the approved fee structure since 2005 and 2006. It means they have been charging illegal fee for last 13 years. So decreasing fee by just 20%, I think it's not a good favor, or as per the law, it is not good as far as parents are concerned.
Right. So since you do represent the All Parents Association, what we would like to hear the parent side of you. What is it that would appease them, and what is it that they want exactly?
And that's not the pleasure or peace like thing. We just want to get the law and the regulations implemented. As they had been charging illegally for last 13 years. So if we get into the mediocre sort of amicable solution, then we can have a best solution, that we can have base fee structure. Let's suppose 6 years back, whatever it was illegal fee access charging since 13 years. So we have a right to get it refunded for the last 13 years. But if we get an amicable solution, then we can have a base fee structure from last 6 years.
Right. But what do you think then? Schools have their side of the story as well, of course, of why there has to be a hike in school fee. Do you feel that at least their complaints or their stance on this merits a hearing by the Supreme Court as well?
Well, they have lost their case twice in Sindh High Court. So if there was any a strong base for the case they have, they might have good favorable results from Sindh High Court as well.
Right. Now, are all in your research, what have you found out regarding all 4 provinces? Is there any province here that doesn't have their fee structure regularized by the courts?
No, yes. Sindh has, it has since 2005, Punjab has since 2015-16, but KPK hadn't have any regulations there. So what we have heard
and
now,
that would mean that any school can charge whatever they want.
Yes, yes,
right.
yes. Few parents from different schools went to court, but eventually they have gone. They haven't got any result as yet, as Supreme Court hearing is still on. But we have heard that KPK Assembly is going to pass on few regulations in favor of private schools. That is what we have heard, and it is not good if they do not take on board the major stakeholders like parents.
Right. But then it seems as though the major burden or the major responsibility doesn't really lie with schools. It seems to lie with the court, who hasn't really ever regularized a mechanism for fee structures.
For KPK?
For all provinces, for countrywide.
Yes,
for
actually it's I think not court but the government responsibility. They haven't been able to implement the already available laws in action. If they would have been doing this, I think this hassle or these efforts by parents, I think they were not necessary if government was in an active situation.
Right. Now, Mr. Rizwan, given the public education condition that we really have in this country, do you feel that we're moving towards a system where private schools will eventually have a monopoly in the country?
It's already an oligopoly. If not monopoly, that's oligopoly already there.
Right.
Few big names are earning a lot. They are literally getting profiteering, as obvious from the latest audit reports submitted by them in Supreme Court. So yes, oligopoly is there, and eventually if right now in such schools, high middle class or low middle class kids are studying, and if things are getting just it has been going on since last 10 years, I think middle class will not be able to get their kids educated in such schools.
Right. So now lastly, what is it really that will make all parents happy?
Once again, if law takes its way and government starts implementing the already existing law, parents would be more than happy then.
But do you have any fears, or do you suspect that the quality of education perhaps would go down? Maybe the teachers that they hire, that start paying them less to cut costs. You must have some fears though, if costs are cut.
Private schools are taking on board the teachers and the parents as well, other parents, right. Positive parents for schools who are favoring schools, and for them that is a status quo symbol, that they do not get into this hassle of court and higher fees. So schools are taking on board such parents, and private teachers now private school teachers are getting hue and cry that if parents do this and court do this and this, then we will be getting lower salaries.
Right. And now in your, you're so actively involved in this, have private schools in Karachi, let's say, shown that they're open to it at least, and shown an interest in perhaps reducing fee to appease parents?
Not at all. Not at all. Unfortunately, we have been after such schools for last 3 years, and the behavior of schools is they are considering the parents who are in the courts as their enemies. They literally discriminated kids of the parents who were in the courts.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your view with us. That was our guest talking to us about Supreme Court's decrees of 20% in school fee of private schools. That is all we have from the show for tonight. Join us tomorrow as we take you beyond the news.